one thing to keep in mind is that the Buddhist teaching doesn't answer all questions. It's not designed to answer all questions. And the teaching we get from the text is that the Buddha said, I teach suffering and the end of suffering. Just that. So one of the questions that was submitted was how or why or who created life, something like that. In Theravada, we don't have a Genesis story, and it would be considered an unfruitful question because it would only lead to more speculation. So the Buddha would say, don't go there. Maybe not, maybe in Pali you can't say that. You get the idea, don't go there. So that's actually very important in developing your own practice. Like what questions do you put to yourself? On a spiritual level, not on a worldly level. Worldly level is another thing. But like Buddhism doesn't answer questions about evolution or things like that. There might be speculation, but that's really not the point of it. And the point of it is suffering and the end of suffering. And if you keep that clear, then your own self-questioning, you'll see if it's just speculative, it won't really help you. It'll just give you an answer, a doubt, someone, So like one of the questions people often ask monks is, how does rebirth work? Don't know. And usually those kinds of people then ask every monk they see the same question. How does rebirth work? And whatever answer they get, yeah, but how does rebirth work? Because it's a speculative question. It's not. You're not going to get an answer. So it's brilliant in that way. The original teachings didn't even have the Abhidhamma. Abhidhamma came like 100 or 200 years later. All the kind of definitions that we have. So it was a very, from what I sense, very pragmatic instruction on human suffering and the end of human suffering. But the end of human suffering at that level of enlightenment that the Buddha realizes, not just kind of being sort of content in a kind of worldly way. So questions are important, but questions which are fruitful are important. And that's a good one to put to yourself. So yesterday, desire, intelligent desire and ignorant desire. So intelligent desire would understand causality, and intelligent desire would consider what are the causes and conditions for the cessation of craving, and craving being an ignorant desire, tanha. So what are the causes and conditions? And that's very pragmatic, isn't it? I live my life. What are the things I could do to alleviate my addictions, my distractions, my obsessions, my incorrect passions, etc., etc. And obviously, in terms of causality, sila. What's the cause for a more stable lifestyle is morality. I mean, it's very obvious, isn't it? So that's not some kind of a commandment that comes from another power. It's just, human relationships, when they're based on good moral foundation, are stable. And when they're stable, there's more peace and there's less craving, less anger. So sila is very important. Although it's a worldly consideration, without that, you're not going to be able to do these higher kinds of considerations. So fidelity is important, sobriety is important, simplicity is important, non-violence is important, honesty is important in all our activities. We all know that, but it's very good to keep that foremost. And if one has business associates who are unscrupulous, or situations where someone is a kalyana mitta but is into vicious gossip, they're not a kalyana mitta because they're not practicing right speech. And so to get drawn into unskillful social situations it wrecks your mind, basically. it messes your mind up. So in terms of what would be a skillful thing, in terms of cause and effect, to develop is good friendships, kalyanamitta. And kalyanamitta is not just like a drinking buddy. it's a bit more profound than that. You can have your fruit juice drinking buddies, that's okay. But kalyanamitta has a sense of Dhamma, has a sense of direction, and can speak honestly. And that's so very, very important to have that kalyanamitta. Generosity, obviously, like the more, a truly generous heart usually wants less, right? And a greedy heart usually wants more, is never really satisfied. So generosity has its own joy, but that joy is not the joy of tanha. It's a joy of renunciation. It's a joy of giving. So there are causes and conditions for happiness. But these causes and conditions are not based on tanha, obviously. I mean, we all know that, but it's good to keep that in mind. There is joy, there is beauty that leads to silence rather than to the noise of tanha. So any ways that one can share one's life with generosity and goodness bring a sense of optimism. And like I found people who get very pessimistic about the world situation. I find a lot of people who don't get pessimistic just do stuff. They just act locally. They clean up the park, or they help a little old lady or a little old monk across the street, or whatever you will. But they do something. They do dana, they do generosity, they do service, and that creates a sense of, there is activity which is wholesome. There's people who kind of just look passively on the state of the planet and just read about the state of the planet and get terribly depressed and negative and so on. So dana, that kind of active part of our heart, is very, very important. Reflection on, like I find, having lots of pictures of my teachers, of my mother, of my fellow monks is really, really helpful. So I wake up in the morning, I'm just surrounded by this whole gallery of beautiful beings. So I look at, like I've got a picture of Lompa Cha's head, a painting, beautiful painting, which is the size of one of those windows, just his head. So I look at him, don't mess about. He's looking at you. I have a picture that size, maybe half that size, of a bust of upper part of Lompa Senedo on the other wall. So now I'm between the two of them. But they're very uplifting, right? Because they're positive signs. They're signs of, first of all, gratitude to my teachers, and then beings who are aspiring to Nibbana, beings who are very accomplished, beings who have been very good to me. So that's an uplift in the mind. So the kind of signs one sees, by a sign I mean not just a stop sign, but the imagery and all of that can be very helpful. And if you look at, like if you go to big cities, you have signs of naked ascetics, 6 foot tall, ladies in lingerie or whatever. And what does that do to the mind? Makes you want to shop or whatever, not me. But those are, and so culture is creating signs of consumerism. They don't they don't give you signs of renunciation, right? So you have to really kind of protect the mind from that constant bombardment. And that's what sensory strength is about, indriya samvara. Indriya samvara is restraint on that pull of society to always make you feel you need more, and you don't have enough, and or signs of violence and hatred and all of that. And those things exist, but sensory strain is, no, I'm not going there. I'm not going to let my mind get polluted by that. And that's a big one. That's a really, really big one with the digital media that we have. So in monastic life, we have some very basic principles that we train with. One is Indriya Samvara, sense restraint, obviously. Also, contentment with little is one of the principles that we train with. It doesn't mean that we're content with little when we begin. So say, I go to Thailand, I'm a young guy, I've been traveling around, living in India, just doing my own thing. Basically, when I get restless, I move, I go away. If I want something to eat, I have a chapati and dal, or I have a mango lassi, or whatever, right? And I'm a poor guy, I'm a student, I don't have much money, but enough to basically sort of do what I want. Then I get into the monastery, and then food once a day, whatever is offered. And the teaching is, be content with little, practice content with little. Well, there's no way I was content, but the contentment with little was the reflection I used to look at my own mind. And this is the idea of reflection. It wasn't like Ajahn Chah wasn't saying, you should be content. He said you should train in the principle of contentment with little. So then the reality of the monastery was the food was not what I was used to. It was coarse. It was pretty rough. I often had stomach problems. So I had yogurt dreams. Dreaming of banana yogurt. Which sounds really silly. You came to the monastery to get enlightened. You're dreaming of banana yogurt. But what it was this the body craving its food. So then there's the craving, there's the desire for that, and then I look at, there was no banana yogurt for sure. And then the mind starts to feel discontent. But because the reflection and the contemplation is now around a theme of contentment with little, you start to say, no, it's good enough. You don't feel quite as good enough, but you start to introduce that idea into I'll survive, I'll make it through. Yeah, but I want 2 bananas. No. So you're starting to kind of play with the desire mind, but you're putting up a kind of a mirror. And the mirror, the model for a monk, which will be helpful for the realization of Nibbana, is contentment with little. Logically, that's obvious, right? Because it's not about tanha. Logically, it's easy to see. Habitually, it's not easy to do. If I have not been content with little, and I haven't, I've just done what I wanted to do at that time. So then I just watched the kind of grumbling in my mind about the food, or I want this more, or I want less of that. And the food was pretty rough, really. My stomach had a hard time for a long time, but that wasn't, I didn't come for the menu. I didn't go to Ajahn Chah and say, what's your menu today? Not quite. So I came for reflection. And then over time I began to see the arising of the desire for different kinds of food. And I could see it manifest and I wouldn't buy into it. And I could see it cease. I could see it rising and ceasing, until that habit of preference for food began to fade away. And the better habit of gratitude for generosity began to dominate. But that didn't happen overnight, right? It didn't happen overnight. And it didn't happen because I repressed my yearning for other kinds of food. It wasn't a violent thing. Repression's very violent, isn't it? It was just, no, I'm going to start to shift my perceptions and the way my mind is now working, dependent origination, right? Towards causes and conditions which create more contentment. And that's the kind of training that we do in Buddhism. We take a theme like that, and then we apply the theme to our own lives, and the theme is based on our own intelligence and our own habits, and what causes suffering, what doesn't cause suffering. So I was so grateful for those years they were very austere years. My complexion was green for 2 years, I think. And a lot of us could not digest the food. It was very, very rough food, and we weren't used to that. A lot of the Westerners, but we were all in it for understanding ourselves, not for the when people come like to the monastery and they have dietary preferences and demands, we say, no, sorry, you can't live here. We just say, you're not here for the diet. You're here for receiving alms food. So that was a really, really good contemplation. And as a monastic, everything that this cloth, this robe, the whole 9 yards is all about generosity. And so that's particular to a monk's life. But the capacity to feel generosity for that which is given, and to move towards, to feel gratitude. Gratitude is a happy state of mind. Generosity is a happy state of mind. So they all undercut tanha. But because they are sources of happiness, but the happiness isn't based on tanha. It's based on qualities of the heart which are actually peaceful. So we have ways of, and we all know this, but it's good to remember that. So, like in terms of contentment with little as a practice, then you might just create. You look at your own life and you see that maybe you're into something which is too high end or too refined, and you say, well, I'll just be content with the ordinary or the average or whatever it is. And then you watch how your mind doesn't want to do that. Or your mind wants to do something else. And then you have a way of looking at desire, which is quite personal, quite particular to your own mind. This is very true in monastery where, like when I went to Wat Pho Pong, food wasn't like a big thing for any of us, I think, because it wasn't that kind of era. Now it's an era where people have a lot of food, much more seeming information about nutrition, and so there are much more food preferences, and I'd never heard of what a celiac thing, whatever celiac is. And so when I came to the West, we found that people had all these views and opinions about food, very adamant about the food. And, this only brown rice, we can't eat white rice, we can't eat this, we can't eat that. So, these kinds of conceits and preferences, they're all oftentimes they're part of tanha. Having said that, if someone has, gluten problems or so on and so forth, the monastery always try to accommodate that. But quite often it's just attachments and not being content with little. Now, as lay folk, you don't have that kind of necessity because you can buy things and so on, but it's something to watch for, where society creates these needs, which are they really needs? Or are they just societal ways of consuming more? That kind of a thing. But what I think is important in this kind of consideration is you're trying to use the reflective mind to understand why you suffer, and then you're trying to create the causes and conditions to go beyond that suffering. And that's intelligent desire, isn't it? It's intelligent desire, because we all want to be there. One of the really beautiful things to develop and contemplate all the time, which does bring happiness, are, of course, the Brahma Viharas. The Brahma Viharas are the heartfelt expression of enlightenment. So metta bhavana or metta is a sense of goodwill to all beings, right? Not just to my mates. Goodwill to all beings. And so goodwill, like sometimes metta is translated as loving kindness, but sometimes it's just non-aversion, just that. Or goodwill, so there's different definitions of it. But it's not the same as like romantic love. It's not that. Although metta would be within romantic love, but it's just the unwillingness to think thoughts of harm for other beings. That's its lowest sort of definition. So as my mind starts to think harm about another, I think, no, I don't want to go there. Even if it's an abstract, like some criminal who is very cruel maybe and hurts others, let's say, or a warlord or whatever who's very cruel, to think thoughts of harm to that person creates a habit of thinking thoughts of harm. So it might seem very innocent, like I hope that whoever drops dead and I hope his car breaks down and goes over a cliff. You know? You think that, but you start to create in the mind a habit of hatred. So it's actually protecting your own mind. And others you might be in a discussion with some people and they say, oh, we should, I hope that guy dies, I hope he drops dead, and everyone feels good about that, right? Yeah, let's hope he drops dead. But actually, what's your mind doing? Your mind is creating the causal conditions for the same attitude to arise next time that group comes together. So that group comes together and says, he should drop dead, and then you do it again, and you do it again, and all of a sudden the mind has a habit that's triggered when any of those situations arise. So metta is like a super good protection from those kinds of habits, and it's beautiful. It brings a good result. It brings a skillful result. Sometimes the habits of negativity are towards ourselves, more often towards ourselves. And then they're just self-criticism, self-judgment. That's not metta, that's not goodwill. Like to live life and then always find fault with yourself, that's not goodwill. That's finding fault with yourself. So some people do that just as a habit. They're always self-critical. And then if you just say to them, well, if you had a child and you did that to a child all the time, what would happen to the child? The child would be messed up like something awful. So goodwill to oneself. Goodwill is, may I be well, may I be free from suffering. Yeah, may I understand, as opposed to judgments and criticism all the time. So that needs to be thought about, it needs to be developed, it needs to be raised up into the mind. So I do it very simply. I remember my teachers, I go to the heart, I breathe in. As soon as I remember them, the heart feels vibrant, and you be well. Very simple. And I use it with pictures. So I say, Lopa Cha, Lopa Smir, and I really feel happy. It really makes me happy in a very simple and honest way. And that's the arising of goodwill. And that's not dependent on tanha. It's the happiness which isn't dependent on tanha. And you can say the more I do that, then the pulls of tanha and distraction are going to be less. So whatever way you like to develop metta, do it a lot. It doesn't have to be like a formal practice, just as a contemplation. So pictures and shrines, and those are very easy avenues of opening the heart, remembering the open heart. Karuna, obviously, compassion. Most of us find that quite easy, I think. We see someone in pain and we naturally arise with the open heart. How can I help you? How can I help you with your pain? But where karuna fails is in worry. So if someone's very close to someone else, a child, a parent, and they see them suffering, the natural response is compassion, but then the addition to it is worry. And worry is tanha. Worry is misplaced desire for this person not to suffer. It's a desire that is then stimulated by thought, which becomes unskillful because there's an attachment there. Obviously, I want this person not to suffer, obviously. I mean, that's a given. But it's the worry on top of it, which is the attachment to desire. And that's something you have to really differentiate in the caring professions. I found that with my mother, that if she was in extraordinary pain one morning, she'd try to hide it. And she'd try to hide it from me because she knew I would worry. And then I realized, oh, wait a minute, I want her not to be old. And she wasn't asking for anything, she wasn't demanding anything, but I say, oh, that's not actually helping her. My worry about her is not really compassion. So being as compassionate as I could, then she had her karma. She had to live with her pain, and she wanted to live with her pain. She didn't want me to worry. She felt, well, get off my back, right? I just let me be there. Let me be with this. And so that's a very important consideration in caregiving. What do I want here for myself? Is I don't want you to suffer. I don't want you to suffer, but I don't want this feeling of feeling your pain, and that it's important to know that. Then then you're available to the person. Like I was just with a friend who, she died about 11 hours after I saw her, and she was really withered, and hard to look at, and so my desire was that she wasn't in this state, right? But that's not my business. But the compassion would be, you are in this state. Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? Yeah, this is difficult. Yeah. Can you let go? Can you let go now? Is it time to let go? Would it be good? That kind of. But it wasn't from my desire and that's an important one to differentiate. Because if you always get your own desires in these complex situations, then you're not intuitive to what is actually helpful. But if you have just compassion that, life is, this really hurts this person. This must be really difficult. That's compassion. And then you're open with that. Then what tends to arise is speech, which is in line with that. It's not patronizing. It's not fearful. It's speech which comes from that place of compassion. And it's very hard in family, parents or kids. We worry a lot about them, justifiably so. Mudita is the third, the Brahmaviharas, and mudita is the joy of life, and like the joy of beauty, the joy of a child's smile, or like with my mother when I was caring for her, I would, in the last 5 years that I was caring for her, we started at the Tisarana monastery. And so every weekend on Saturday morning after breakfast, I would go to the monastery and I'd come back on Sunday afternoon. And on the Sunday afternoon drive, we did that same drive for 5 years, every Sunday afternoon. And there's a independent grocery store in Carlton Place. And my driver would take me there and he'd get a bouquet of flowers. And then we'd take the bouquet of flowers and I'd bring it to Mom, and I'm real corny, I'd hold it behind my back. I'm a really corny kind of guy. And surprise! And I did that for 5 years. But each time I just enjoyed her smile. Little, like this 70-year-old or 65-year-old son, right? Hey Mom, here's the flowers. But it was a joy to see her smile. I mean, she was very happy I was back, obviously, and then kind of her openness, and that's mudita. And that's the kind of happiness which is not dependent on tanha. It's not built on craving, it's built on generosity, on being in touch with another person's happiness. Its opposite is jealousy, right? So to touch the beauty of life is a great source of the cessation of craving. To touch the beauty of bird sound, say, like that snipe who I haven't heard since I talked about him. I find that really quite uplifting, just to hear, oh, that's interesting, that's really cool. And so nature has a lot of beauty. Some art and music, there's a lot of beauty in that. So although on a retreat, we put aside music and so on, music can be very uplifting. It doesn't have to be addictive. It can bring a joy and beauty and calmness to the mind. We as monks don't have access to that because we are expected to find that beauty in meditation. Yeah. But there's nothing like more immoral about listening to music which is calming. But some music is not calming. So that's not my expertise, but I would say that what is the function of beauty? Its function isn't attachment and ownership. That's consumer beauty. You know, they make things really cool, which are out of fashion the next year. And how do they do that? They're brilliant. Old cars look old, but they look new. But the beauty that we have in nature is something that requires an open mind. If I'm just thinking all the time, and I'm walking through the forest, I won't know the color of the leaves, I won't hear the bird sound, I won't see the wind across the lake, I won't see any of that. But if my mind is attentive and silent, then a great amount of beauty can come into consciousness. And that's very healing, very uplifting, and it's a kind of quietness of joy, I would say, not the noisy joy of Party Central or something like that. It's the quietness which is part of the Brahmavihara pattern, and it's not based on craving. Upekkha, equanimity, can be misinterpreted to mean some kind of non-participation in life. Upekkha, I'm equanimous, nothing affects me. But to me, all four of the Brahmaviharas imply some kind of love, some kind of connection to life. And then upekkha wouldn't be separate from metta to me. You know, upekkha would be, there's a peacefulness in the heart, a peaceful coexistence with things, but there's also goodwill in the heart. It's like not the goodwill kind of disappears when you have upekkha. That wouldn't make sense to me. They're all about the heart. Upekkha is very difficult with like family, very difficult. We really worry about our family and kids. And so to kind of consider, well, my mom had her karma. And she was living it well. So to resolve the difference between metta, karuna, and worry, I had to contemplate upekkha. So what's peaceful coexistence with this now? Oh, she has her karma, I have my karma. I can't carry her karma, and she's not asking me to. I can only carry my own karma. And then I kind of came to a sense of peacefulness with her. Oh, okay, I get it. And then I was actually a much better caregiver, because now I wasn't fraught with my own desires and worries. You know, I was more with the peaceful coexistence of the way things are. And I did everything I could, obviously. So the Brahmaviharas, in whatever way you read about them, you contemplate them, you manifest them through practices, are a great source for the ending of suffering. And a heart which has that, you have so much fulfillment there that you don't need much distraction. It's very, very important. All right? So that was a long one. Let's stretch the legs and sit a bit. I won't give any instruction, I'll just leave it to it. So.